Hello, everybody. It is Professor Parish, and we are already at week 5, which is crazy. So there's a lot to go over this week. I just want to basically start our discussion of drama. Can you believe poetry has come and gone? Who knew? The speed of this summer class is staggering, and it only gets faster from here. So there's a lot to talk about, but that's what we're going to dive into tonight. So, as always, if you have questions, you can email me, call me. Since it is the holiday break this week, I will be in my office all day tomorrow, and I'll be in my office on Wednesday afternoon. And then after that, it's 4th of July, so we get the rest of the weekend off. Woot. So, but as always, I will be able to answer emails if you need to send me anything or ask any pertinent and dire questions. So, as of right now, as I record this video, the only thing I have left to grade from week 4 is your poetry paper. Some of you may have already gotten your poetry paper back from me. If not, you will have it back by the end of the week. Don't worry. But I do take my time. It is holiday week and weekend, so I am going to take my time with your papers and sort through them accordingly. So just bear with me. Keep checking throughout the week. You'll get your paper back. Don't worry. But I do want to go ahead and look at our assignments for this week and break them down. So we have got 4 assignments this week. One of them is obviously the discussion forum for week 5. I'm going to open that up for us to see. There's 3 short videos that I want you to watch with this discussion forum. If you know the actor John Malkovich, he's been in a lot of movies. I always think of The Man in the Iron Mask for some reason. It's such a cheesy 90s movie. It has Leo in it. It's great. If you've not seen Man in the Iron Mask, watch it this weekend. It's cheesy, good fun. But John Malkovich is in that movie. He's in a lot of things. But that's the one that's springing to my head at the moment. But he talks about, he's a classically trained theater actor who also happens to be in film. So he talks about kind of the difference between theater and film, because a lot of people think that they're similar, but they are very, very, very different entities. So he talks about that in one of the videos. And then the other videos, there's different things to talk about, such as Shakespeare, the Globe Theater, other aspects about drama that I think help introduce this subject to us as a class. I did say that we spend the least amount of time on drama, and we really do. In the summer class, it's not as apparent because everything's kind of separated out pretty equally. When I do this as a 16-week course, we don't spend a lot of time on drama for a number of reasons. One, because I want to get you prepped for the final paper, which comes right after this. And next week, we're actually going to dive into the final paper as well as conclude drama, because I want to give you as much time as possible to work on it. 2, because in all honesty, if you're coming here at SIC, we have a lot of drama classes. We have Intro to Theater, we have Theater Topics, we have Intro to Drama, which is an English-based drama course, we have Theater Appreciation. We've got a lot of classes that actually focus on drama and theater. So I feel like if this class has opened you, if this unit of English 122 has opened you up to really appreciate drama, don't worry. We have more classes you can take to fully explore the genre of drama and theater. So this paper, we're going to talk about paper guidelines very quickly, but here shortly, rather. But I honestly think paper 3, the drama paper, is probably the easiest paper of the class because it's very, very straightforward, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we get to it. But anyway, this is the discussion forum, 3 questions based on the 3 short videos. And by short, I mean they're like 2 to 5 minutes each. So it's not going to take you very long to get through them. Your initial posts are all due by Friday. Your peer responses are due by Sunday. And I have to say, you all are doing a pretty darn good job with these discussion forums. Those of you that turn everything in on time and get your responses in, top-notch responses, top-notch posts. Pat yourself on the back. Give yourself an extra piece of freedom cheesecake at the 4th of July festival. So the next thing is our scavenger hunt. We are still working with MLA. I think everybody on a whole has done a fantastic job with MLA. If you didn't watch my MLA video from week 4, make sure to go back and watch that because it will come in handy. But the scavenger hunt is pretty straightforward. It's due by Sunday. And what it is I actually have a list of different types of MLA formatted citations, and your job is to go out and find them somewhere on the internet or in paper version. So there's 4 different types of sites that I want you to find. One is either a website or online magazine article, so like an article on a web page. That's one. 2 is the interview, and we'll talk about it very soon. 3 is a print book. You can even go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble and look up a book, and it will give you all the information to cite it, if you don't have one of your own that you want to cite. And then finally, the last one is a peer-reviewed journal article. I think some students get confused when I say peer-reviewed. Peer-reviewed is pretty much what any major official journal is going to be. And what that means is that a set of peers for that journal have looked at the articles and selected them to be published. It basically just means that the publication process in a journal is much more rigorous, and therefore the article is much more credible. That's all a peer-reviewed journal article means. If you want to go online and look up an article from the American Cancer Society, that's going to be a peer-reviewed, credible journal. But if you go to Vanity Fair and claim that that's a journal, I'm going to question you a little bit, okay? Because it's not a peer-reviewed, rigorous publication process. Okay, so you're basically finding 4 different sources, and you're going to cite them. They have to be these types here. But I'm going to give you a freebie. If you're watching this video right now, I'm going to give you a free answer to this assignment. And that's number 2, because if you have looked on Purdue OWL, which we talked about in our MLA citation presentation, MLA on Purdue OWL shows you how to cite interviews. They are the easiest things to cite in MLA. Bar none, they are the easiest. And a lot of students want to like go out and find some YouTube interview or a magazine. No, that's not what I'm asking. I just want, like, if I interviewed you, how would I cite that? These are the easiest things to cite, interviews are. I'm going to give you the answer to number 2. And when I see that you've put this as your answer, I'm going to know that you watched the video. And if you didn't put this as your answer, I'm going to know that you didn't. There's actually been one student already do this assignment, so they're off the hook because I didn't make this video before they could turn it in. But everybody else, you're not off the hook. I'm joking. So number 2, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys the answer to this one. Number 2, citing interview, is actually really, really easy. So to cite an interview, here is the formula. And you can either put down the formula as your answer or an actual example. So the formula is the last name, comma, first name of interviewee, then a period. The phrase personal interview, because that means I've personally asked you several questions. And then the date of interview. That's it. That is it, ladies and gentlemen. So if I go down here and I put, let's do Ron Swanson. And let's just put today's date. That's it. That's all I need. I'm good. I'm solid. I'm set. That is an interview. So if you put either one of those answers down or something similar as your answer for number 2 in the assignment, I'm going to know that you watched this video, and you won't see it, but I will stop grading and give you a spiritual thumbs up that hopefully you will feel radiate towards you at some point. So if you're having some indigestion on the 4th of July and you're like, know that that's me giving you a thumbs up for doing really good on this assignment. All right, so that's a scavenger hunt. It's due Sunday. And then we've talked about your discussion forum. Posts are due Friday. Responses due Sunday. We're going to save this one for last. The reading response number 3. Now this one, we're going to talk a little bit about Shakespeare and Greek tragedy today. And drama in general. So this reading response is pretty straightforward. It is basically involving you watching 2 short videos about Hamlet and Antigone. Now, if you've read Hamlet and or Antigone in high school, or in college or whenever, then you may not need to watch these videos. You may know the answers to the question right off the bat, and that's fine. But if you're like me, when I was in high school, we did not read Antigone. We read Hamlet and we read Macbeth, but we didn't read Antigone. So you may need to look at these videos. These videos are just brief summaries of the plays themselves. The Antigone one I actually really like because it's student made, so a student made it, and it's kind of cheesy looking, but it's actually really informative. I like the way the student constructed the analysis. The Hamlet one is like a Spark Notes reading, and as an English teacher, I know it's sounding, you're like, oh, my English teacher is recommending Sparks Notes? What is happening? But in all honesty, since we don't have time to read Hamlet for this class, this video does a really good job of breaking down everything that happens. The only downside is that the guy reading Hamlet has the most boring voice I've ever heard. So if you want to put on like closed captions and like pop in some good music and then just read what happens, I wouldn't blame you, because the guy's voice is really, really boring and monotone. But I had to pick it because it was so informational. I was like, all the information's here, just why couldn't you read with more emotion? But anyway, once you've watched those videos, or if you know already about Hamlet and Antigone, then the reading response is simply answering these 4 questions and then submitting to the Dropbox. So it's a pretty straightforward reading response in comparison to the ones we've done in the past. But just an analysis of Antigone and Hamlet. That's it. Something simple. And then finally, we're going to talk about paper 3. Paper 3, as I've said before, is probably our easier paper because it's the opposite of the opposite of the poetry paper in terms of difficulty and challenge. So I'm going to go down here to week 5. Get our I'm going to go ahead and download the drama presentation and have it going. I'm also going to download paper 3 guidelines. Okay. So paper 3 is just dealing with drama, which we're going to talk about today and next week. And it's a really pretty straightforward paper, probably the most traditional that we have in the class. And that is simply, I'm going to minimize that. And you're basically going to pick one play, either from the textbook, or if it's not in our textbook, if it's a play you have like the playbill for, just let me approve it and just let me know about it to make sure that it's all right. But it can be any play from our textbook. We have 800 pages of plays in this textbook, so surely one play in here will satisfy you. But if not, or if you're a theater buff and you're like, oh no, I have a better play, by all means, that should work. But the idea is that your play, you read the play, you should analyze it. You can look at film adaptations, you can look at video reviews, you can look at a variety of options. But the idea is that I want you in your paper to address these 3 key questions, okay? And you can answer them in whatever order you want or through however means you want, as long as your paper addresses these 3 things. 1, you need to analyze your play in terms of character. Who's the characters of the play? The setting, where does it take place and when? And the theme, what's the play all about? And I want you to explain these terms and any others that stand out to you. So if, style is a big thing with your play, talk about it. If plot is a big thing in your play, talk about it. So if there's any theme or term that we go over from our presentation or in the chapters that you feel applies to your play, go ahead and talk about it. It's totally fine. What type of play is the one that you picked? Is it modern American theater? Is it classical Greek theater? Is it Shakespearean, etc.? If it's not one of these 3, is there a specific term that applies to it, such as tragedy, comedy, intrigue, and what makes it fit into those categories? So you may find that the play that you picked goes into a lot of different categories, and that's fine, but I want you in your paper to explain those categories, how it fits, and why. So it's kind of a mix of your opinion versus what we're learning from our textbook about these categories. So that's question number 2. And then finally, what drew you to this play? What should the reader take away from it? So there's probably a message or an overall theme. What is it, and why did you specifically want to write about this play? So this paper is very opinion driven, but it's also relying heavily on our textbook and the terminology. So you definitely need to cite your textbook. I know that some people did not cite paper 1. Hopefully they cited paper 2. Some of you haven't, but that's okay. Just make sure you cite your textbook and any other source that you use. So if you use a play outside of our textbook, make sure to cite it. If you use any article reviews or YouTube videos to explain anything, make sure you cite it. 3 full pages, like paper 1, at least. It can be longer if you want. You don't have to limit it to 3 pages. That's just the minimum. Should have an introduction, a conclusion, a separate works cited page, and in-text citations. So it's a pretty straightforward paper. As far as due dates go, your thesis and outline are due this Sunday. The final draft is due the next week. So, but I honestly think that a lot of you will get this done early because it's a pretty straightforward paper to write. And then the breakdown is pretty much the same as it was for the last couple of papers. Or at least for paper 1, it's very similar. All right. So that's pretty much our guidelines for paper 3. We are going to talk about the drama, chapter 26. We're also going to talk about chapters 27 and 28 this week. And then we will finish up with the rest of the drama presentation next week. All right. So, in talking about drama, our discussion forum this week is going to go over live theater versus film versus traditional text. But the big thing is that there are 3 different things. So your books read one way, film reads another way, and theater reads a third way. And they're very, very different. And John Malkovich kind of talks about this difference, so I'm not going to spoil that from the video. But the way that we interact with seeing a live performance versus reading it is pretty impactful. I mean, you can think back to how many books you've read and then you watch the movie adaptation and you thought, oh, that's not how I pictured that character. Or, oh, they left this out, or they changed this. I mean, there's some film adaptations that I just won't watch. My friend got me into Miss Peregrine's School for Extraordinary Children. I can't watch the movie because I watched the trailer and they'd already changed so much from the book. I was like, what are you doing? So I refused to watch it. On the other hand, I just finished Good Omens, which is a series, and it's very true to the book. So I think that you can see kind of the positive reactions on the one hand from fans that are happy when source material is kept up in the adaptation versus when you change a lot and then the adaptation you're like, what are you doing? So there's a lot of subtle differences. Theater is very much, I don't know if any of you have been in a play before. I was in a few when I was at SIC, and they're a lot of fun. Plays, it's very much, as Malkovich will describe in the video, it's a wave. That you ride the wave, and he'll talk more about that in the discussion forum. We've talked about soliloquies and monologues, but we haven't really discussed the big difference between them. A monologue is a moment of interior dialogue. So in Hamlet, there are times when Hamlet talks to himself, and that's a monologue. If it's around other people and he just kind of saunters off to himself and is like, oh yeah, here's my story. That's a monologue. A soliloquy is an entire scene. So likewise in Hamlet, there are entire scenes where Hamlet's just talking to himself. He's just plotting, planning revenge. He's just going on about his ideas, and there's no one really to listen to him. Whereas in plays like Sweeney Todd has monologues and moments where he talks to himself, but there's usually other characters there. So he doesn't quite go the full Hamlet, I'm going to go, talk to myself in a room for an hour. He's just kind of like thinking to himself out loud while he's in the room with other people. An aside is when a character speaks in private on stage, and when you think about it, you're on a stage, so there is a suspension of reality, because if someone's doing an aside in a play, they're probably like 3 feet from a character, but we're supposed to pretend as the audience that they're removed from the scene and that the other characters can't hear them. Now, we do have characters that are secret keepers in plays, and they're called confidants. And a confidant is just someone that is supposed to keep information secret that's usually very valuable. And usually the confidant is the instigator in the play because they can't do their job right and they can't keep a secret. Usually most plays that build on suspense or intrigue have some kind of secret keeper that doesn't do their job well. Foil is my favorite term, I think, from this textbook. And a foil, it has nothing to do with math. I'm going to tell you all right off the bat. I had a student 2 years ago that on their final exam, I said define foil. And you know what they did? They gave me the math definition. I am an English major. The math definition. Don't do that. Don't give me the math definition. Blah. Instead, I want the drama definition, which is two large personalities that play off one another. My biggest example I can think of is a buddy cop movie. There's always like this serious, down-to-earth cop that's like been on the force for 40 years, and there's the new, rebellious cop that doesn't play by the rules, and they have to butt heads for an entire film. That is a foil, okay? Woody and Buzz from Toy Story. They are foil. They are two giant personalities playing off one another. Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter, Voldemort and Harry Potter. The Harry Potter universe has a ton of foils, but the idea is that you have two large personalities that play off one another. That's what a foil is. Typically in plays, we have more complex, rounded characters. They have more depth to them. We get to learn more about them. Self-recognition is when characters self-realize something in the play and they kind of learn something about themselves, gain a piece of their identity. And then an idiom is a common phrase of a language or culture. I actually had two friends of mine from college that got to teach a group of South Korean students how to speak English, and their specific job was to teach these students idioms. And as Americans, we think that idioms we don't even think about them. We're like, what's an idiom? I don't know. But for a non-English native speaker, idioms are hard because all they are is that they're a cultural phrase. They don't really make sense outside of the culture. So for example, the South Koreans that were learning English, they did not understand the phrase, you've got to be kidding. Like, I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. They didn't get that because kidding, they're like, what does kidding mean? Does that mean joking? Is that, you got to be kidding me? What does that mean? And so we had to, my friends had to explain to them basically what that phrase meant. And they were like, okay. So if you're not part of that culture, that phrase may not make a lot of sense. And Shakespeare's plays are full of idioms because Shakespeare wrote for Shakespeare's people. He had no sense, I don't think he had sense of trajectory that his plays would be read around the world. He was concerned with London and that crowd. So he uses quite a few idioms in his plays that make it difficult to understand, to be honest, unless you know the historical context. I think that's why a lot of people struggle with Shakespeare, is that he wrote so much for the people of that time. He wasn't focused on being timeless. He just wanted to make a profit and write good plays that people he knew would enjoy. So I think that makes reading Shakespeare interesting, definitely, but also definitely a lot harder because we're not the audience he was intending to write for, which I think is kind of fascinating. But anyway. So on page 1138 in our book, I want you to look at this play, Don DeLillo's The Mystery at the Middle of Ordinary Life. And I want you to take a second, pause this video, and read that short play. And then when you're done, press play again. Okay. Hopefully you've read that play by now, and you're just pressing play and coming back to this moment. So Don DeLillo is a pretty famous writer. He writes a lot of fiction, but he also does plays as he does here. So this is what we call a one-act. It's just a simple scene, and that's it. That's the play. But it uses a lot of elements of storytelling as well. I wanted to pick this example to show you all because I think it does the play version of what Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants did. It gives us two very non-existent characters. They're not deep. They're not rounded. They use very vague and choppy text, but within that there's a lot of depth. There's a lot of talking about you know, when you're at the middle of your life, what do you think about? How is your relationships? How are they building or deteriorating? What are you going to do about it? So there's a lot to discuss and unpack here. And I really think this is a good example of looking at internal versus external conflict as well. We have our external conflict, which is the situation of the man and woman clearly not talking to one another very well. But we also have the internal conflict of these two individuals that are struggling to keep a connection. And when they do, it's something based on monotony and routine. So there's a lot to talk about with this play, but I think that it's a nice example that our book gives to kind of summarize a lot of the terms that we've looked at so far and evaluate in a very short, quick sense. All right. Deus ex machina is Latin for God machine, and it's basically a plot device that is used to get characters out of danger at the last minute. And in all honesty, when you think about it, it's pretty incredible because it's been over a millennium, 2,000 plus years since this term came into existence, and we're still using it. How are we still using it, you may ask? Well, there's a lot of examples. So, right off the top of my head, Jurassic Park. Last scene of Jurassic Park. Velociraptors closing in on everybody, about to eat them. What happens? A giant T-Rex just manages to come out of nowhere, eat a raptor, throw it across the room, save the day. Was that T-Rex anywhere else in the building 5 minutes ago? No, but it swoops in like a Greek god and saves everybody, saves old Alan Grant and gets them all out of there, right? Back in Greek plays, the Deus Ex Machina would typically be a Greek or Roman god or goddess that would just spring out of nowhere and save our heroes at the last minute. And that's kind of, it was a thing. Everybody was expecting, oh, who's going to cameo in this play? And that was sort of the plot device. And we still use it today. So Jurassic Park, you've got that. Toy Story 3. Woody and Buzz and all his buddies are about to burn into a big pit of lava. Seems like there's no hope. In comes the claw machine with those creepy little alien dolls. Were they anywhere else in the film? No, not really. But they swoop in at the last minute like a Roman chariot, grab Woody and Buzz and his friends and get out of there. You can find a lot of different examples of Deus Ex Machina. They're everywhere. You could search on the internet and they're going to give you a plethora of them. But the idea is still the same. It's still getting characters out of danger at the last minute from an unexpected source. Most plays have subplots, which are small plots that may or may not connect to the rest of the play. An ode is a tribute, often sung by the chorus in the play. And then rhymed couplets. These are two lines in a play that end in a rhyme. And as we keep mentioning Shakespeare, he did like him some rhymed couplets in his plays as well. And our book gives us some nice examples of those as well next to that term. All right, so we're breaking down chapter 27, Greek tragedy. Mainly these are the terms that we associate with Greek tragedy. And so far in the discussion forum, Greek tragedy seems to be the favorite, although there's not been very many in the discussion forum, so that might change between now and Friday. The messenger, you hear the phrase, don't shoot the messenger. It comes from Greek tragedy. The messenger in the play is typically the person delivering news, and usually it's not good news. So that's where that phrase, don't kill the messenger or don't shoot the messenger, comes from. The idea that this character in the play is delivering bad news. We've talked about genre since the very start of this class, but genre is just a term for different types of writing, and it started actually in the realm of drama and expanded out to, ironically, other genres of writing. These next four terms, all deal with the plot of a drama, of a play. The complication is the starting conflict or the problem that arises. The denouement is a French, and it's the unraveling of the plot towards the climax. In my wonderful Southern Illinois hillbilliness, I used to call this the denouement. And then finally someone was like, oh, you hobo, it is denouement. I was like, oh. So I have to say it with the wonderful French flair that it has now. The denouement, the unraveling of the plot towards the climax. The peripety is the twist in the story, often the twist that reveals something exciting or dramatic, and that leads us towards the climax. And then catharsis is a purging of feelings or emotions at the end of the play. So when you think of the end of Hamlet, everybody dies basically, and this new guy just waltzes in and is like, oh yeah, I'm king now. There's a sense of catharsis. By the end of Hamlet, there's been a purging of feelings through the death of Hamlet and nearly everybody else in the play. So yeah, that's those terms. Typically in a Greek tragedy, the main character is usually a hero, but they also usually have a tragic flaw or a fatal weakness. If it's Achilles, it's something physical, like their heel, but, if it's a different character, it may be something internal, like a personality weakness, and usually if it's going to be something related to personality, the most common is hubris, which is just a synonym for pride. Usually they say pride goeth before the fall. Pride is the downfall of a lot of Greek tragedies with the characters. Pathos, if you were in English 121, you probably talked about ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos being credibility, logos being logic, and pathos being emotion. In Greek tragedies, pathos is also used as a term, but it just literally means suffering. It's not just emotional, it's the bad emotion. That's pathos in a play. And then finally, most Greek tragedies are defined by their conflict of the antagonist versus the protagonist. Whether those characters are mortal, whether they're immortal, whether it's mortal versus immortal like Hercules or Heracles. Usually they have an antagonist versus protagonist in that situation. Now Shakespeare, chapter 28, Shakespeare was a huge fan of Greek tragedy, much like J.K. Rowling, who writes Harry Potter, was a huge fan of Shakespeare and Greek and Roman plays. Shakespeare was a big Greek tragedy fan, and a lot of his terms that he actually coined, when you read them, they sound like Greek terms. You're like, wait, this seems like something that would be around during Greek times. It's insane. But Shakespeare kind of coined and made these phrases and terms popular. The biggest one is stage business. Now, you have to understand how plays started. During Greek times, plays were originally just a group of 5 or 6 guys on a street corner just performing a skit, and they're just wearing robes. And then when Greek theater became a thing, people were still just mainly wearing robes, standing on a stage, and maybe they had a papier-mâché mask or something that would differentiate their characters, because this was before the idea of the Globe Theater, so the theaters in Greek times were all just kind of stacked. But if you were way back in the back, you wouldn't be able to tell which character is which. So they'd wear like big elaborate masks or different colored robes so you could tell who was who. But that was about it. There was not things like props or set changes or costume changes. Those things didn't exist until Shakespeare's time. And he was like, let's get some scenery on stage. Let's do some costume changes. Let's get some props. Let's do some like hidden doors. I mean, he was all about changing sets and props and themes quickly within a play. He kind of coined that. Shakespeare also created subgenres of drama that we know of as intrigue, which is like a suspense, mystery, or thriller, and then revenge tragedy, which is an obvious term. It's a tragedy about revenge, and Hamlet is arguably the most famous of that genre. Mythology. Shakespeare drew heavily from Greek and Roman mythology and legends. He also liked to use blank verse, which was unrhymed iambic pentameter. I cannot imagine writing an entire play in unrhymed iambic pentameter. Like, that just seems like such a challenge, and Shakespeare wrote a lot of his plays like that. It was just a stylistic choice that he made that worked really well. This term right here is the one people mostly associate with being an actual Greek term more than a Shakespearean term, but Shakespeare coined it, and that is of the colossal protagonist, which is a main character that overshadows everybody else in the play. So Hamlet is probably the best example of this, because even if you've read Hamlet in the last year, even if you've read Hamlet in high school, or even if you've never read Hamlet, if I asked you to name me 10 characters in Hamlet, the first one you're probably going to tell me is Hamlet. You might say Ophelia next. You might say Claudius next. You might say Gertrude. Anyone else? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? That's 5. Laertes, 6. But it's hard to think of characters, right? That's because a colossal protagonist, when Shakespeare wrote his plays, he wanted people to remember that protagonist. That was his selling point. So Macbeth, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, they are colossal protagonists. And they're kind of meant to overshadow all the other characters in the story. And we have some of that happen today. I know I talk about Harry Potter a lot. Harry Potter is not a colossal protagonist because there's so many other side characters that share the spotlight with him. Ron, Hermione, Draco, Neville. I mean, the fact that I can just instantly name them off kind of shows that. But The Great Gatsby, Jay Gatsby, is a colossal protagonist. He's the main character and he's the one that everybody remembers his name. Some people remember Daisy, but other than that, you might be hard-pressed to remember some names. The movie Birdman that just came out a few years ago, that all deals with a colossal protagonist, which is Michael Keaton's character. So anytime you have a story where the main character is really the only one you remember, it's probably because they're a colossal protagonist. And then on page 1371, I do want you to look at that. There's a section called Juxtapositions, and it's on Hamlet. And the idea is that it's just different people's takes on Hamlet and different ways that they've analyzed Hamlet. So there's one analyzing Hamlet through a psychological perspective. There's one looking at it through the male gaze. There's one looking at it through feminism. There's one looking at it through politics. I mean, they're just different ways of looking at the same story. And I want you to check out that section because it shows you that we could all pick the same play to talk about for paper number 3, but we could also all look at it in very different ways. And that's what I think is cool about being able to analyze these plays. So definitely check that section out. All right, we're going to save American drama for next week. We're going to finish out the last couple of slides here next week in our presentation. But in the meantime, that's all I'm going to talk about drama for now. Next week, we'll finish up talking about drama. We'll actually start talking about paper 4, which is insane, but I want to go ahead and bring it up, and we will conclude drama. So if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I'm excited to read your paper number 2s. I'm excited to see what you're going to talk about for paper number 3. And I'm excited to see your discussion forum and your other assignments. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a fabulous holiday weekend and be safe. And I will talk to you all again very soon. Bye.